You Season 4 just totally blew our minds, as Joe Goldberg generally tends to do. Let's take a look at parts 1 and 2 of Season 4 and find some of the details you might have missed. Obviously, You Season 4 spoilers ahead. I'm Joey C. Let's go! We're gonna start with how all this connects to Batman, because of course we are. So you know when Joe and all of his friends, or I guess they're not friends, is frenemies the better word? God, that sounds so middle school. Whatever. Joe and all the rich jerks go on a rich person's getaway in a mansion. That's so terrifyingly British. Like, look at it. But anyways, it's called Knebworth House, and it was used for tons of stuff in Season 4. The interior commons area was used as the commons area of the university where Joe teaches. Phoebe's, playroom was made inside there. So were a bunch of the other party scenes. But hey, if it looks familiar, that's because it is super familiar. For instance, The Great Muppet Caper filmed there and was released in 1981. Even if you don't recognize anything else I mentioned, you know Kermit the Frog. Pennyworth filmed there, and so does The Crown. Most importantly, they filmed Paddington 2 there, and that is cinema. But it's also where they filmed Batman in 1989. Pretty neat, huh? Okay, now we've sufficiently managed to connect You Season 4 to the DC Universe somehow. Let's steer in a different direction. There are some serious parallels from this season to Season 1, and I know what you're thinking. We're going all the way back to Season 1? What about the other seasons? Well, be patient. We'll connect stuff to love in Season 2 and 3 later on. So first, we'll cover the most obvious parallel. When Joe only knows Kate from the window, he watches her get intimate with herself. She has fun with herself. God, talking about the show and being a semi-family friendly channel is so difficult. Anyways, listen to that song that Joe hears in his head when he sees Kate do that. Remember when Joe watched Beck do the same thing in Season 1? Yeah, same song. Another parallel. Remember when Kate falls on top of Joe this season? Doesn't that look familiar? Yeah, look back on Beck falling on top of Joe during Season 1. That looks pretty similar, doesn't it? Definitely a parallel, except with Kate, there was much less vomit involved. Let's veer away from disgusting things for just 1 second, while we talk about a murderer. Don't forget to subscribe down below. We don't bite at Screen Rant, or chop you up at a sawmill. Bad joke. Maybe you had to be there. Now, we gotta cover the elephant in the room. Rhys Montrose. He was arguably one of the biggest surprises of the season, obviously. But like, if you go back and watch the beginning of the season knowing how it ends, you start to feel like an idiot, honestly. And I feel like that often. Don't worry, we did that so you don't have to. You can save your time. If you pay attention to every single one of Rhys's entrances and exits, none of them can be seen. Not one! The first time we see Rhys and Joe talking at the Rich People Club, he literally comes out of nowhere. Someone walks by Joe, and then Rhys is sitting there in the chair and introducing himself. It's an easy trick of the eye that can go unnoticed when you're assuming that Joe is the reliable narrator. But when you know he's, well, Joe, it's an edit that's easy to spot. That happens a few times with the entrances and exits of Joe's imagined version of Rhys. But when that's not happening, we just don't see Rhys enter at all. When Joe walks into a room where the group is, Rhys is always already there. It's dope. While we're talking about Rhys, let's talk about his clothes. The real Rhys Montrose usually dresses pretty spiffy. He's got drip. I should not say that. No, that sounded bad. Let me do that again. He's got style. Yeah, I didn't say anything else. Rhys has style and dresses pretty fancy. We see him in blazers and suits and whatnot. But if you notice, the Rhys in Joe's head is never wearing that kind of stuff. He's always wearing something straight out of Joe's closet. He wears sweaters and casual pants with the occasional coat or scarf. Now, I'm not saying Joe Goldberg has ever or will ever wear a scarf willingly. That's not really in his wardrobe or personal repertoire. But it makes sense that the person representing Joe's inner monologue is wearing clothes that are similar to his. And okay, look, this would be a reach, but all the rich jerks around Joe are constantly talking about Joe's sense of style. He's made fun of for buying off the rack. Like, once an episode. You can make a drinking game out of it. It's a hell of a hint that they only make those comments at Joe. If Rhys was already wearing what Joe thought he was wearing, wouldn't Gemma be insufferable towards him too? Sneaky hint, Netflix. Sneaky, sneaky, baby. Before there was Rhys in Joe's head, there was Marienne. Am I going to mention her powerhouse performance during Season 4, Episodes 8, 9, and 10? Even though that's literally not what this part of the video is about? Yes, I am. Tati Gabrielle, where is your Emmy nomination? I'm waiting, but that's not something you missed, obviously. We'll get to that later episode of the season later. We're gonna talk about the scene where she got on the train. So, we know from later episodes that Joe puts something in Marienne's coffee when she sets it down for a second. Then, when she's drugged, he takes her off the train and kidnaps her, cause he's just charming like that. He's Joe. But the initial time you see that scene, you only see a glimpse of that cup. Then, it's very carefully kept out of the shot while Joe takes Marienne's necklace. He sits down, watches her get on the train, and sends off a picture of the locket. But the first time we see that scene, we never see or hear the train move. So technically, Netflix didn't lie there. Joe's brain just forgot some details. He's an unreliable narrator. Who is shocked? Not me. Okay, now let's analyze these texts that Joe is getting on his phone. Now stay with me. But these text messages were literally the biggest clue that Joe was his own stalker. The first message alone was, "Hello, you." And yeah, Joe says that to Kate a few times this season, but he barely says it to anyone else. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Joe says that 100 times each season. Yeah, you're right, but he only says it in the narration for us to hear. He's not just walking around like, "Hello, you," to randos on the street, or even his friends. He never even says that phrase to anyone he suspects would be his stalker. But that was a clear nod to Joe specifically. The only person who would think to do that and notice that pattern is Joe. And the way the stalker describes Joe, he says, "I'm learning a lot about you. Paranoid, loner by nature, absolutely not a real professor." The creepy list format, that's exactly how Joe describes people when he is doing the stalking internet deep dives. I swear, sometimes the clue is right in front of your face. We're all as dumb as Joe's victims. Now, let's get into Malcolm. God rest his entitled rich boy soul. Having seen part 2 of the season, we know that Joe killed him. And there's that one part where that guy finds Malcolm's ring in Joe's pocket. Joe is super insistent in a way that was definitely not overcompensating for anything, even subconsciously. No way. He's a normal amount of stressed. But when Joe realizes he was framed, there's a quick montage of everyone that could have potentially dropped that ring in his coat pocket. The list includes basically everyone, obviously, because why would the show narrow anything down? Or give any hints? Except they literally did give a hint. When you think about it, it's insane. When you watch that scene, you're trying to decide who has the best angle of dropping the ring in his pocket, right? Well, you don't see even a flash of a second where someone he bumps into could have done it. And that's because nobody did it. It was already in his pocket, because he was the one who killed Malcolm all along. It's another example in this season where the omission of detail was the biggest hint that could have been. And those are some of the trickiest clues to pull off, but also the hardest to notice. Not to gush, but it was super well done. This is a bit of a jump, but now we're going to talk about Nadia. You know, Nadia. It was so fun rooting for her to bust Joe this season, while also having a weird, complicated emotion where we hope the murderer doesn't get caught. But anyway, if anyone was going to catch Joe this season, it was going to be Nadia. Not the fact that we should be judging, given the fact that we've watched 4 seasons of this show. So, she comes close to getting Joe convicted. She finds evidence with her boyfriend. They're gonna go to the cops when Joe, murders her boyfriend. He frames her, and she's smart enough to keep her mouth shut, so he doesn't come back and murder her too. But there was a moment in the early stages of Nadia's investigation where she was close without even knowing it. She's talking with her boyfriend and thinks it's weird that Phoebe's kidnapper and stalker was the killer. She says it's too obvious. Wouldn't it make more sense if there was an average Joe killing the elite? Yeah, she actually says average Joe. It's so on the nose. If only she Googled that name with a few other buzzwords. Now, remember how we connected things back to Beck? Now we have to connect things to Love, because of course things always come back to that crap. So they talk a lot about Joe's time with Love in season 4 of You, especially because she's so much of why Marienne had split to Europe in the first place. I mean, hell, if Love didn't tell Marienne about Joe being a murderer, then Marienne wouldn't have gone to Paris. Then she wouldn't have gone to London, and Joe wouldn't have followed her to London, and kidnapped her, then become the eat the rich killer, and fallen in love with Kate, and then moved back to New York. It's a whole story. God, that was a long sentence. I need to breathe. Anyways, season 4 is Love's fault. Thank you, end video. But remember the season when Joe says, "Love gives you second chances"? That's an obvious nod to capital L Love. Love gave him a second chance, taking him to the suburbs. And then she gave him a second chance when he killed her and started over for the 1,000th time. Wild. Alright, now this is a big one. Let's take a look at the scene where Joe kills Kate's dad. When Joe and fake Rhys are hiding in the darkness of the shadow, yes, I'm trying to sound extra dramatic, shut up. They're in different lighting. I know that doesn't make sense when you first mention it, but seriously, let's take a look at it. You can see that Joe is shaded with the shadow in darker lighting, just like he's supposed to be. But Rhys, he's not. Look at him, bright as can be. That's because he's not real. Shadows don't affect him. He's so much more brighter than Joe, even though they're standing directly next to each other. Again, the editing that this show did for Rhys Montrose's character was cool. So those are some things you might have missed in Season 4 of You. Did we miss anything in this season of You? I think that when we're all watching You Know What, there's a lot of pronouns in this outro. You know what to do. You, I... Damn it!